Okay, thanks Calvin for the introduction. I think I'm the second American that's come up on the stage, so please don't throw anything at me. I actually took a job in Europe a couple months ago, so soon my tax dollars will be going elsewhere. So sorry about that behavior. So as Calvin mentioned, hit the green button, okay. Just talk a little bit about some technologies. I do get around, have worked in research and seed production around the world for most of my career, and my presentation's relatively short. Not a lot of really good things have already been said by Brianne and Christina, so I won't reiterate all of those things again, but just want to start off with a couple take-home messages, and then just going to show you some images of different technologies that are being developed or in early stages of use in grass seed production around the world. So I think it's no secret to those of you in the room that grass weeds are the biggest concern in grass seed crops. So I come from Oregon. If there's one thing that I think, now I don't work there, so I can say whatever I want, but if there's one thing that are going to take that industry down, I'd say it's herbicide resistance. And that is largely because of a lack of crop rotation and because of overdependence on the same chemistries over and over and over. And there's a history of when we get a new herbicide, we not only use it on grass seed crops, but then we get it registered on all the other crops that we rotate with in the grass seed system. And so we are exposing the same weeds, even in our rotations, to the same chemistries. Okay, so it's thinking short term instead of thinking long term, and that has come back to bite us. Jerome was up here earlier, talked about the lack of access to herbicides and other pesticides in Europe. So when I was making the transition from Oregon to Europe, people said to me, why do you want to go to Europe? They can't spray anything. And I said, well, we can spray everything we want in Oregon, but none of it works. So we're all in the same boat, aren't we? We're all in the same situation. So I was just spent the month of January in New Zealand, where they have a fantastic crop rotation, but over-reliance on the same chemistries in those rotations and starting to pick up resistance, especially in annual ryegrass, with annual ryegrass or Italian ryegrass weeds in their grass seed cropping systems. I don't think it's a new concept to you guys, but especially in Oregon, where you're trading on the global market, when markets are tight, like we heard about this morning or earlier today from Dan and Jerome, having a clean seed lot is going to help that seed dealer move your seed. Okay, so sometimes that's going to make a difference of whether you're going to get paid or whether your contract's going to get tore up or whether your seed's going to sit in the warehouse for a few years. Okay, so it's not the COVID days are over where we could sell floor screenings. Now the market doesn't want that. So it's not just about your field cleanliness, but it's also about can you move your end product. As we've heard all day, managing weeds needs to start way before you plant a forage seed crop. It needs to be part of the rotation, okay? And if you have fields that are not suitable to go in grass seed crops because of grass seed weeds, even if it means you have to grow a less profitable crop for a few years, that in the long term is going to save you money. Okay, so I know it's tempting when seed prices are high. Oregon is a perfect example where we go from one grass rotation to the next grass rotation. Maybe we break it for a year with wheat, whoop-de-doo. That doesn't cut it, okay? Must prioritize diversifying crop rotation. You guys have the benefit or the luxury of having, canola and Roundup Ready crops. Those are not things that can be grown in Oregon. And so, take advantage of the tools that you do have in this area. Starting with a clean seed bed is absolutely critical. Your poor agronomists can only do so much for you. You've got to start with a clean seed bed. And again, if that means you've got to give something a break, you got to chem fallow, or you got to plant something you don't really want to plant, sometimes you've got to make those sacrifices. Managing field borders, Calvin brought that up. You see a lot of weed seeds get brought in from field edges. I also see it come in on equipment. We do a lot of baling in Oregon. have growers call me all the time and say, I don't know, I've got this brome in my field and I've never had a brome on my farm, and my uncle who farmed before me has never seen a brome. Where did this brome come from? Well, did you bale the field? You know, if you're swathing a really weedy field, you know, are you cleaning that equipment before you move it to the next field? There's a lot of ways. I actually had a grower call me the other day and said, I've got POA in a field that I haven't seen POA in 20 years, and it's all in this one big area at the entrance to the farm. And we started talking about, well, where could this have come from? They're really good growers. Well, they had grazed that year and sheep unloaded right in this one spot, where now all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of POA that's resistant that wasn't there before. Okay, so you gotta think about your field edges, what you're moving in and out of those fields that could be introducing contaminants. I would also say that goes for looking at the seed test on a seed stock bag. So there was some discussion about cowboys in Poland earlier. It's not the only place where there's cowboys, okay? So if you've got bags of seed coming from certain big grass seed regions that have massive herbicide resistance problems, you know, maybe you need to get your own seed test even before you put that in the ground. You need to make sure that the stock you're planting is weed-free. Okay, I've seen too often fields get planted and the rows are clean, or sorry, the space between rows is clean, and crop advisor calls me and says, I've been advising this field for 20 years and I have this, like, I've got all this annual ryegrass in my rows of tall fescue now. You know, what's the deal? I said, well, what'd the seed test say? Well, I don't think we have a seed test. Are there any certified tags on those bags? No. So, you know, you need to think that's on you to be doing your due diligence before you introduce seeds into the field. And talk about annual bluegrass. It wouldn't surprise me if that's not moving around in seed stock bags. Short-term sacrifices for long-term gain. Spot spraying, roguing, I should have put mowing there, weed wiping. Sometimes these are painful things, I get it. But it is way cheaper and expensive things to sacrifice a few acres or to pay for a spot spraying crew or to spot spray yourselves. You are going to spend far less money on that activity than you are on bailing yourself out of the situation you're going to create by not doing it. It is going to cost you far more money in the long term than it is to do, you know, sacrifice some acres by mowing it down so the weeds don't go to seed, spot spraying, pulling weeds, etc. So the picture that I showed you right there has had 2 applications of Roundup on it. Okay, that's a perennial ryegrass field, and that's annual ryegrass. Weeds that have had 2 applications of Roundup. By the way, there is no reason to be cutting rates of Roundup. That is not an expensive chemical, and exposing weeds to partial rates of herbicides is a bad idea. Anyways, you know, you get into situations like that, and that's a lost cause for your seed company can only do so much to move a seed lot that's been grown in a field like that. So in this particular case, it was a farmer took over a new piece of rental ground, so he didn't know the history, and they rogued after they sprayed twice and started spot spraying and realized nothing was going to happen. They rogued every single one of those plants out. So anyways, we've talked a lot about what you shouldn't do and what you do that causes these problems, but the bottom line is there's an old weed scientist at Oregon State who's retired now, but I thought quite highly of her. She taught me a lot about weed management early in my career. And I heard her tell the farmers once in Oregon, you've sprayed yourselves into this and you're not going to spray yourselves out. And I think she was absolutely correct. Okay, so there are things that we can do with chemical control that are obviously effective. We've got to take care of those tools. We can't overuse them. But we're obviously kind of up against a wall right now as farmers all over the world, whether it's for resistance problems or for regulation or whatever. So I just thought I would include some different photographs of technologies that I am seeing being used and introduced into grass seed production systems around the world. So, you know, very basic, and Brianne reiterated, you can't use drones to spray in Canada. I think it's still at this point. You can in the US. In terms of herbicides, this has been a fairly effective strategy for getting sprays on the fields where we cannot get a ground rig on because the soil's too wet. And that might make a difference of whether you can get a weed when it's really small versus waiting for that soil to dry out and then trying to control a much bigger weed. In the Oregon environment, Poa annua, or annual bluegrass, in a good environment can go from seed to seed in 6 weeks. So sometimes that makes a world of difference, the timing of that. But the other reason why I put drones on here, not because I think that they're an ideal method to distribute herbicides. I think they have other uses that are maybe more important, but they can be effective with mounting sensors on them and mapping weed populations in a field that are then you're using another method of spot spraying or controlling those weeds. So it does give you a good aerial view, and there are ways with the technology that's in your all sprayers now to perhaps use them or satellite images to make maps, and I'll show you some examples of how fine-tuned these technologies have gotten. These are 2 pictures, and this is, probably pretty small scale for most of the sizes of the fields and the prairies here. But this is pictures. One is a robot that's doing mechanical weeding in Denmark. The other one is being used in Oregon. These are both research equipments, but they're both autonomous robots that are doing mechanical weeding in rows now in seed production crops where there's either resistance, organic systems, or just lack of options. The white one is diesel powered, the green one is solar powered, so pretty cool machines. You map the edges of the field and they're completely autonomous. Okay, so I think one of the most optimistic things that I'm seeing be developed by weed scientists, and I see this happening both in Oregon and in Europe, is to start training computer models that can take images off of drones or off of sensors that are actually mounted on sprayers, and they can essentially be trained to recognize weeds and then be fed into your sprayer system or into some other system that can spot spray weeds. So this can be particularly effective where you also have a reduction in the amount of active that you're allowed to apply per acre. Sometimes you can get a higher concentration when you're just spot spraying versus broadcast spraying. But here's an example of a perennial ryegrass field that has weed contamination in it. This picture was taken in Oregon. And the images, so these are taken by a drone, okay? So this shows the precision that drones can take images at now. The images that are, let's see, on the right or left side of the screen for you guys, were given to students, and they were told to circle all the weeds that they could find in those pictures. Okay, and then basically, those same images were fed to a computer model that's been trained with thousands and thousands of images, and the computer was asked to identify the weeds in the image. And what's really interesting is that while the model missed a couple of weeds, it actually identified more weeds in the picture than the humans did. Okay, so this is the level of technology that I think is coming. There's various ways in which it's going to be delivered. I will say it is a level of accuracy that must be very high, or you're going to have big problems. But where we cannot use, where we're still having to use selective herbicides and there's resistance problems, this is allowing potential use of non-selective herbicides over larger areas than what are feasible for spot spraying or roguing. So here's an example. This is a sprayer that's set up on a research farm in Oregon where a drone basically flies the field, maps where every single individual weed is, and then that, so you'll see in this demonstration, if we can get the video to work. Did I just hit the slide change button? There we go. So as that tractor drives across the field, and those sensors, there are 4 sensors mounted on every nozzle. As one of those sensors sees that weed, it's just turning individual nozzles on and off and spot spraying that weed. Okay, and that is all being fed by the model that I showed you earlier. So then there was some discussion, Christina just talked about placement of fertilizer, okay, and are there ways that we can think about trying to starve the weeds while still feeding the crop? So again, this doesn't work in every situation. If you got creeping red fescue that's 3 years old, you obviously don't have rows anymore, okay? But in newly established crops, could these be used as tools? Technology is now allowing us to plant on perfectly straight rows, and technology is now allowing sprayers to be synced up to the same system so you can, be exact. And so this is actually a photograph of underneath of a sprayer that is also applying liquid fertilizer. This is in Denmark in a grass seed crop. So what you're gonna see in this video is one set of nozzles that is growing over top of the crop row and is dropping liquid fertilizer just onto the crop row. And in between the crop rows, there is inner row spraying going on with shields on both sides to basically make the inner rows clean. And that's, in this particular case, they're using pronamide or curb. You can go ahead and play that. Okay, so there's the fertilizer and there's the herbicide. Okay, so that's a system being used in Denmark because they are only allowed to use a certain amount of active per acre, and so this is a way to be able to use a higher rate in between the rows of the crop. So again, dependent on technology though. And then I think this is the last example that I'll show. This is actually a system that is, so most of what we've seen until the last two slides are still in research phases. The last one that was a commercial rig that that video was taken from. This is a device that's being used in Oregon. It's being utilized by one of the local co-ops who sells chemical and fertilizer. They actually have 6 of these now. Growers can call them and hire robots to come to their field, and these robots have been trained with computer learning to identify certain weeds. Poa annua is the weed that it is best at this point, but they are adding other weeds, and they've got a list and they're checking them off, but you're talking about a couple of years to train these models good enough. So these are autonomous sprayers. You order them from the co-op, 3 at a time come to your field. It takes about 2 hours for them to spray a 40-acre field. They can run 24 hours a day, so the limitation is the chemical in the tank, not the fuel. They can keep running for quite a long time. And so basically I'll show you a little video here, but what this is doing is just driving over a field and spot spraying POA as it goes. There's nobody there. There's one technician that mans the robots just to make sure the chemicals are filled, but otherwise they're completely autonomous. So the trick here, you can see there was definitely some crop that was sprayed out. So the question is, do you use something like Roundup that's going to translocate, and if you touch one leaf of the grass crop, you've then killed that grass plot. In this particular case, they've been using glufosinate, and just took a picture of it close up here so you could see how, so those nozzles are every 2 inches, and they are spraying a 2-inch square spot spray. But if you're using something like glufosinate that doesn't translocate, the sensors have got to be absolutely perfect, because if you only spray half of the weed, then perhaps you make it sick, but it recovers, okay? And that's also terrible way to manage for resistance. So I would say that the technology is dialed in, but there's still things being sorted out in terms of, what exactly is the right chemical to be using in a system like this. But I think that's, I've got one more. I never like to recommend growers to think that their problems are going to be solved in the seed cleaner. Weed management starts in the field, and anything extra you can get out of the cleaner is great. But there are advances. Like if you really think about seed cleaning equipment, we've kind of been using the same old things for decades. But there are some advances, I think, coming, and that could continue coming here. This is an optical sensor that's in Oregon right now. That's been trained to basically see annual bluegrass and perennial ryegrass seed. Again, it's using AI. It's not perfect, but you can see in the photographs there in the top, that's a perennial ryegrass sample that's got a bunch of POA annua in it. They introduced POA in it that was dyed red and ran it through the sensor, and you can see they've got it trained at this point to pull out 65% of the POA that was fed in with the perennial ryegrass seed. Anyways, I guess the take-home message here is I don't think any of these technologies are perfect yet. I'm not even sure that they're, other than maybe the robot, the autonomous robot is really usable in a commercial system yet, but I think it's optimistic to know that there's technology being used and developed in our seed production systems that are coming. I think they'll continue to get better over time, and these are options for when we've sort of beat our head against the wall. So it's a sort of a moment of optimism to see these things being developed, and it's not just happening in one industry, it's happening around the world, and so things that I think hopefully we can look forward to in the future. So that's all I've got now. I think Talon's ready to go to a business meeting and hand out more awards or something. So thank you very much.